Anyone who's played Pokemon can probably tell you that the formula for games in a new generation is typically 2 versions of a new mainline game, a third complete version, or a sequel to each, and then a remake coming about every other generation or so. Sword and Shield, however, bucked this trend by instead opting for downloadable expansions, at least for the time being. With these expansions being cheaper than the traditional updated re-release or sequel and not requiring the purchase of a new game, they're an interesting alternative that might allow for more flexibility in contrast to the old release formula. However, what do DLC expansions actually offer for Pokemon in practice? The 2 expansions for Sword and Shield are the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra, which released in June and October of 2020 respectively. Both more or less follow a simple outline. A brand new wild area, a short main storyline featuring new legendary Pokemon, and a few new features that add to systems from the base game. In practice, these expansions feel less like significantly new story content and more like a post-game side quest, kinda like the Delta episode from Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Ultimately, I don't think this is a bad thing though. I've always found these post-game journeys to be charming, especially since they get to be a little different tonally and narratively from the main plot. Though it is disappointing that Sword and Shield lacked substantial post-game content, I feel that the DLC expansions like this are going to be the best way going forward for Pokemon to add that kind of content. Making new games and then adding polished new content on top of that, which was what was happening the past few generations, doesn't seem ideal long-term for both developers and players, both in terms of time and expense. I'd rather see the kind of free updates that Sword and Shield have received along with expansions down the line that allow for more experimentation. To be clear though, I probably shouldn't paint these expansions as huge diversions from the norm. Again, they don't feel all that different from side quests like the Delta episode. Their greatest strengths, however, are the new wild areas, both of which are more polished executions of the base game's wild area, and they showed some really interesting possibilities for new entries going forward. One of the most notable features of these new wild areas is that there are few, if any, loading screens. The wild area in the main game felt like a very isolated part of the map and not very naturally integrated, but the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra feel a lot more akin to a real open world. An open world region is something Pokemon fans have wanted for a long time, and the new DLC areas are basically miniature proof of concepts of that, and by and large it works pretty well. Crown Tundra in particular uses this very well. Finding the temples of the legendary titans when I was wandering around for a different quest was a neat discovery, and I enjoyed how the expeditions given to you by Peony didn't have to be completed in a certain order. One of the issues I think expansions going forward will have to contend with though will be, well, the Pokemon themselves. To be upfront, I'm in a position that most players will not be in. I actually have completed my National Pokédex in previous generations, and I have a living dex at that. So to put it more bluntly, I don't really have a need to catch older Pokemon. I was able to grab all of my older ones from previous gens off of Pokemon Home, and I more or less had the new Pokédexes completed right off the bat. While obviously a lot of new players won't have this issue, this is inevitably going to be a problem when the next generation comes out and does the same thing. How do you make catching Pokemon exciting if you've already caught them all? This is where I feel the focus on legendaries comes in handy. Although Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres are not new Pokemon, their new regional variants were exciting and their battles were difficult and intense. In addition, the brand new legendaries had a lot of significance thanks to their role in the story, so catching and using them felt pretty rewarding. I think focusing on unique variants and narratively driven motivations for catching Pokemon is going to be the best way going forward. New mechanics and game modes and expansions should encourage catching beyond just filling in the dex, and could perhaps even guide players towards using Pokemon in new ways, like teaching the basics of competitive play or advanced breeding, which is something the mainline games have already been increasingly doing. One of the things I found myself wanting far more of in these expansions were new modes of battle. These are both very capture focused, which lost a lot of its appeal for me due to my completed decks, and there aren't any trainers to fight outside of the ones necessitated by the story. That being said, the 2 major boss fights available at the end of each DLC were fun and a decent challenge as well, especially in the Isle of Armor. The Sword and Shield expansions do offer 2 new modes, the first of which being Dynamaxx Adventures, which is an excellent evolution of the raid battles from the main game, and a mode that is unlocked after completing both expansions, which I'm not going to spoil because that actually was a pretty nice surprise. Both of these modes are quite fun, but the issue for both is that they do have limits on their longevity. Dynamaxx Adventures' main draw is catching rare Pokemon, which is hindered again by the issues with having captured past Pokemon. The second mode is heavily trainer focused, which is really good, but it doesn't really have long-term rewards outside of money. What I'm getting at here is that I really would have liked to see more Battle Frontier-esque modes. As most fans will decry, Pokemon has really done these competitive level challenge modes dirty in the past few gens. Sword and Shield stung the most for me because these games' Battle Tower lacks interesting modes and doesn't have multiplayer, the latter of which was one of my favorite parts of doing these modes. Though it might be a bit risky since not all players enjoy these kinds of modes, I feel that having expansions dedicated to adding things like a new battle frontier would be a really good way to cater to different audiences who might not be invested in just doing more base game like story content. Ultimately, how I feel about expansions for Pokemon is that there's a lot of different avenues that could be taken, and offering different experiences is probably the way to go. I did enjoy my time with the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel lopsided. I got a lot more enjoyment and time out of the Crown Tundra than I did the Isle of Armor, and I wouldn't have minded if I could have just paid for that one alone. I feel that having smaller, cheaper, and more focused individual expansions would allow for greater customization with in-game experiences, which is one of the greatest strengths of Pokemon, customizing how you play. Pokemon is a series that has gotten by on a lot of repetition because its core works so well, but DLC might be the best way to safely try out new things in smaller doses. And overall, I would say that the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra, imperfect as they are, show a bright future.